Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and my computer's about to die. And this is the Backlog. This week's game was Shantae and the Seven Sirens, which is the fifth in the series. You play as Shantae, a half-genie who is invited to an island to take place in a half-genie festival, alongside four other half-genies. However, when they do a practice run of their show, the lights go out and all the half-genies other than Shantae disappear. She then has to explore the island and the labyrinth underneath to rescue the four girls and solve the mystery of the sirens said to lurk within. Her friends, Bolo, Sky, and Uncle Mimic, who joined her for the prospect of a free vacation, will provide help along the way, and she also encounters her nemesis Risky Boot throughout her adventure, though her goal is not immediately clear this time. Now, this game is a Metroidvania, a platformer with interconnected areas that you can explore more and more as you unlock more abilities. The dungeons you explore are separate areas that you find entrances to in the main world, though if you view them as maps that are just overlapping with the main area, everything is still connected as the genre intends. This is in line with the first two games, Shantae and Risky's Revenge. The other two titles function similarly. They had a hub area that you then traveled to the other areas from, with Pirate's Curse having other islands to explore with a dungeon to unlock somewhere in them, and Half Genie Hero being more linear, with you traveling straight to the dungeons and you just going from one end to another, with a few hidden nooks containing secrets. As for Shantae herself, she has a few different methods of offense and exploration. Her main weapon is her hair, that she has tied back in a ponytail, which she can use to whip enemies, and this can be upgraded for greater speed and damage. She also has several spells, such as fireballs and a bubble shield, which can be purchased in the store, along with higher levels of the spell, and they cost magic to use. Lastly, there is perhaps her most famous, as well as most hit-and-miss technique, her animal transformation. These are used largely for traversal, but they can also be used in combat in some cases. Now, normally in the games, when you need to use these moves, you need to stop, hold the dance button, and then belly dance until the option you need appears. And you'll stay in that form until you either cancel out of it or something knocks you out of it. These are neat, but even if they only take a second or so to complete, this can require a lot of stopping and going, which really breaks up the pace of the game. Now, in Pirate's Curse, Shantae had lost all of her magic, and she used pirate tools to compensate for her lack of transformations. These were assigned to specific buttons so that they could be used instantly, and this really kept the game flowing. Here, they seem to have combined the two concepts. Shantae can transform, but since they're used for very specific moves, each of them are tied to a single button press with maybe a directional input. This equates to boom, instant use, and smoother, more natural gameplay. Also worth noting that in the previous three games that used them, Shantae typically had three transformations that would always pop up, with specific abilities attached to them. Here they've been replaced with different animals, but with similar purposes, which really highlights the same but different vibe they seem to be going for here. Instead of the monkey, you have a newt to air dash and climb. Instead of the elephant, there's a tortoise that breaks certain blocks. Instead of the mermaid, you have a frog to travel underwater. There's also the Gastro Drill, which is a creature with a pointy shell that she uses to drill underground through soft soil. Of course, all that said, Shantae is still a dancer, and so you still have use of her belly dance, just for a different purpose this time. There are 4 dances that you get in between dungeons that they take up a bit more magic than the store-bought spells, and they affect the entire screen. The first checks the screen for any hidden items, the second heals you and anything around you, and the third and fourth are both AoEs you can use to clear a room, or at least soften up stronger enemies. Since these are situational, you probably won't be using them constantly other than maybe to search if you have OCD, and so stopping and taking the time to use these dances isn't as annoying and insensible as in previous titles. On the contrary, in the past when you danced, time would stand still until you made your choice, but here things continue to happen, so the action never stops, and you have to be careful about when you use them so that you don't get sucker punched when you're trying to get a spell off. The last thing worth mentioning is the number of healing items throughout the game. There are 4 types that can be bought in shop, but there are even more that are dropped by enemies, very generously I might add. I got game over I think twice near the beginning when I had little max health and I just wasn't really paying attention to it. But after that I had no problem because no matter what I came up against, I beat it without any issue due to carrying an entire buffet in my stylish harem pants. There were similar items in other Shantae games, but here it got a little ridiculous. We'll discuss this, further later. So that's how the game plays, but there's something else that goes hand in hand with Metroidvanias that I haven't touched on yet. Actually, two somethings that are kind of the same something, and that is exploration and collectibles. Here there are 4 main collectibles. The first is the spells and various other upgrades you can purchase from the various shops. Most can be bought at any of the stores, but there's a special series of upgrades that are exclusive to each of the game's town. The second are heart squids. Much like in Zelda, your health is visualized by hearts that can be broken down into forts. And also, much like in Zelda, if you find 4 heart pieces, or squids in this case, you can add an extra heart to your max. Unlike Zelda though, you don't get the container automatically. You take the 4 squids back to town and you have the squidsmith smash them down into the power-up. The next collectible is nuggets. You find them in random spots by poking random things, and it's not immediately obvious what they're for. This brings us to our next collectible, trading cards. There seems to be a card for every enemy in the game, and they will sometimes drop them upon defeat. Each card has an associated buff or ability, and up to 3 cards can be equipped at once, though some require multiple copies of the card to unlock. You can collect more than you need, and these can be sold for cash at a certain town in the game. The bosses of the game are the titular Sirens, and each of them have cards as well. Rather than get them upon their defeat though, you have to buy these cards from various NPCs in exchange for nuggets. I didn't figure this out until after the second dungeon, and by then I had already amassed a nice cache of the things. The abilities you get for these are typically pretty good, as you would expect. Now, in Shantae games, much like the Metroid series before it, upon completing the game, you get a clear screen based on how well you did. Typically, there's one for just clearing the story, one for getting 100% of the items, one for speedrunning the game under a certain time, and one for doing both. I think there might also be a 5th here for getting the other 4, but I'm not 100% sure. The 2 time trials, though, are typically to be done on subsequent playthroughs when you're given the option to start with certain abilities pre-unlocked, so that you can clear and grab stuff without as much backtracking. Normally, I'll try and do a 100% items run on my first time through, but this time I settled on just a regular clear. There were 3 reasons for this. First, to get the 1 heart squid, you need to ace this one dancing minigame that is notoriously hard, and I wanted to have the game cleared for this video, and not just risk it being late because I had to grind out attempts. Second, when I got to the last dungeon, I took a break from the game to look at an item guide to see what I needed to do to find all the collectibles. Some of them required me to use a specific dance on a specific screen, which didn't always have a visual cue that something was hiding there. That and me not being 100% sure what I had and hadn't found made it clear that I would need to go over the whole map again and check every darn spot for what I missed, which would probably add a few hours to my playtime. The last issue was the cards. I'm not sure what the drop rates were for them, but some seemed to drop more easily than others. There was this one endgame enemy that they threw at me a ton for like the last hour of the game, and as I was wondering if I would ever get a copy, one of them finally dropped one when I was about 3 screens away from the final boss. Some enemies are also pretty uncommon, so between hunting them down and grinding out multiple encounters with them discouraged me from wanting to have to do a 100% run. To be honest, I'm not even sure if the cards counted towards completion, which further turned me off. The file select screen lists your current percentage, and when I started my last play session, it was at a certain number, and when I finished, it stayed at that number, despite me getting at least 2 new cards. Maybe that just wasn't enough to move the needle, but that just made my goal hazy, so I decided to finish the game at any percent. And don't get me wrong, this is definitely a multiple playthrough game, so at some point I will get everything for that extra wallpaper. I'll just have to keep more careful notes. For right now though, I was happy just seeing the ending. I also wanted to talk about how the game looks and one other trend these games seem to be taking. First, the game's opening is animated by Studio Trigger, which is my favorite animation studio. It has a fun little song that plays along with it, and it's only about a half-minute long, so if nothing else, I recommend checking it out. They put it out before the game as advertising, so it's pretty easy to find. There are also short, animated cutscenes before each boss and at certain key points of the story. Unlike the opening, these are rough, and it might tie into the other thing I wanted to discuss. That was this game was originally a timed exclusive on Apple Arcade. These scenes probably looked alright on a smaller screen, but they seem pretty rough on a regular television. Let's talk about that exclusivity though. Shantae has gone from an obscure niche game on the Game Boy Color to one of the most prominent indie series. I imagine they got paid a nice chunk of change for this deal. The last game was also crowdfunded, so it seems like WayForward is putting back some money. If I were feeling pessimistic, I'd say that they might be being greedy or that they're having money problems due to poor management, but because they normally deliver some pretty good stuff, I'm hopeful that they're just trying to build up a large cash base, squirreling away some extra money where they can, so that they can keep improving on their titles, making bigger and better games. That does raise the question though, was Seven Sirens the best Shantae game, or was it another in the series? Shantae and the Pirate's Curse was the third game, and it was also the first one that I happened to play. I got it on the eShop for the Wii U when it was on sale, and since then I have bought it an additional 2 times. This game is amazing, easily the best, and also a pretty big departure from the 2 games that came before. I talked about this earlier, but the big difference is that rather than having to stop and dance to transform, in this title Shantae collected pirate weapons to gain additional abilities. Not only were they instant use, but they were also a lot easier to use in combat, making them many's preferred way to do business. It was also made in collaboration with Inti's Creates, the Mega Man Zero and Gunvolt guys, and I can't seem to find who did what between the two of them. I'm not sure how much of this game was WayForward. It always kind of bothered me that the Shantae game, considered by most to be her best adventure, was the one that dropped one of the series' main mechanics, and that it also required a likely fair bit of outside help to make. I was concerned that we'd never get a Shantae game as good as Pirate's Curse without giving the reins to another developer. However, Seven Sirens has alleviated this fear significantly. WayForward seems to be aware of why Pirate's Curse was so beloved, evaluating what parts of the Shantae series they were not willing to give up as well, and combining these elements to take the series in a direction that is more than the sum of its parts, I'd say. Like I said, the transformations have been retooled for instant use, much like the pirate tools, and Shantae's dancing is now for larger spells, which makes more sense to take more time to do. Instead of just getting heart containers, the Squidsmith is back, and you collect heart squids and have her forge them into extra health for you. There's no real mechanical reason for this, it seems that WayForward just knew she was a popular character and brought her back, which really says a lot about how they listen to their fans. The story also had a very Pirate's Curse feel to it, with it filling out some world lore and introducing new elements and characters. One of the major topics covered is what happened to the full genies, in the Pirate's Curse it being the Pirate King, and here the cause being the sirens that Shantae finds sealed underground. I guess that half-genie hero may have done similar things, but I might have been bitter that they seem to be rebooting the series with that title, after leaving so many tantalizing plot threads dangling that may now never be addressed. The reboot, which they were very coy about whether it was a reboot or not, so who frickin' knows, also tosses a lot of things up in the air and makes it harder to follow canon. The one thing that they took inspiration from Pirate's Curse for sure, though, is how they utilize one of the main characters here, and the angle that they frame her relationship with Shantae is very similar to Pirate's Curse, and one of the more interesting aspects of the plot. I wish I could say more, but that would require pretty hefty spoilers for both games. Just trust me when I say it's good. So, is Seven Sirens just as good or even better than Pirate's Curse? I went back and forth on this a lot, and the answer is, or at least my answer, is almost. Almost. If they make a few improvements, I think the next game they put out could be the best yet, but as I said, they need to tweak a few things. The first big thing is the difficulty. I think this is the easiest Shantae game I've ever played. There's a few reasons for this. First, the enemies drop food left and right, so you always have something in your pockets to recover health with. Combine that with a few auto potions for the times when you're not paying enough attention to your health and you're pretty much immortal, which, as you can guess, makes getting to those end credits a near guarantee. Also related is the game's economy, with money being another plentiful resource. About 2/3, maybe even 3/4 through the game, I had bought everything I could and went from obsessively breaking every pot and vase for gems to really only bothering if it were directly in my way. A lot of the things I was buying weren't even for use, it was more just to fill out my file percentage, so the next game either needs to drop less money or give you a more practical series of things to do with them. And finally, the game's it's pretty easy. Plain and simple. There were some bosses, some of them even late game, that I didn't even need to heal while fighting. I could just manhandle, or lady handle, them into the ground with very little effort. This issue might have been a format problem. I haven't tried playing platformers on my phone before, so I'm not 100%, but I imagine that the controls aren't as precise as a controller or keyboard given the size difference. A big reason why the game was so easy might have just been to take this into account. Since the initial audience, and thus the initial reviews, would be coming from phone users, I'm betting that they probably had to make the game doable on a tiny screen. That means no super tricky enemies and no situations to navigate and require super precise moves with a more limited control setup. While I don't begrudge them this, especially if it lets them get some extra cash put away to use on the next game, fingers crossed, I do really hope that the next title is designed for consoles. Ideally, the difficulty should be somewhere between this one and Pirate's Curse. As much as I love the game, Pirate's Curse could sometimes be unfair, especially with their bosses. Dagron was bullcrap. Squid Baron had too much HP, and the true final boss was both. There are also just some common enemies that did way too much damage. If they can find the sweet spot between the two games, they may just make not the best Shantae game, but also the best way forward title as well. The last thing I'd say they should improve would be the map. The map is set up just like in Metroid, each screen being a block with very clear lines, or lack thereof sometimes, to show a door or whether further exploration can be done. Special symbols denote where special rooms are, such as save rooms and teleporters. This is all fine. There were several times in the game where I didn't know where to go, so I would just start traveling in directions I hadn't gone to yet, and I would magically come across a plot point. So in this regard, I'd say it's laid out perfectly. The problem comes specifically from trying to find items. Now, in dungeons, there are 3 heart squids, and this is kept track of in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. On the main map, though, you have no idea where you're missing what, and if you're not keeping careful track of what you got where, getting everything even with a guide will be hell. Now, while the map is just one big area, it is divided up into several color-coded sections. If the game would just give you a head count of heart squids and nuggets in each section, keeping track of how many you picked up, this would go a long way in improving the collection process. 2 other things they could do would be to mark on the map when you come across a room that has an item, but you don't get it on your first trip. Metroid would mark the square in question with a circle that turned into a dot when you did manage to get the item. Then, if you could also make notations on the map, that would be huge. There were dying plants I came across early in the game that I knew were important, but I didn't have any way of interacting with. When I got the recovery spell which could revive them, I gave myself a headache trying to remember just where I had seen them all previously. Giving you several symbols that you could mark the map with would make a big difference. Maybe I use one of the symbols for plants. Maybe I use one for where I obviously didn't have the transformation I needed yet, and maybe there's one for where I could trade in a nugget once I found more. I'm not sure how common this is in Metroidvanias, but I mean, WayForward could start a trend here. Come on. Now, with my suggestions out of the way, it's time for me to either recommend this or not. Obviously, I love the game, so I would suggest this to just about anyone. There's only 3 things that would really prevent me from doing so. The first is if you just don't like Metroidvania. That's cool. It's not for everyone. If you tell me that you had the best first-person shooter available, I personally wouldn't care because it's not my thing. It's just a matter of preference. The second is if you only like challenging games. While I thought this was a fun romp, some people only want test the skill, which, again, is cool. The third is if you're easily overwhelmed with collectibles. I think that this is the Shantae game with the most defined, and it can be really hard to pick out what you miss, so if you're the type that will only be satisfied with 100% and not having everything will cause you to lose sleep, this is probably not the game for you. That probably sounds silly and a little too specific, but gaming OCD is a thing. If none of these 3 things apply to you though, give this game a try. It's fantastic and almost the best Shantae game out there. Thinking about it, I could probably do a list of where I would recommend each Shantae game based on what the player is looking for. So if Shantae is a series you're interested in but maybe don't know a lot about, let me know in the comments below because I'd love to talk at length on the subject. We also got a new Amiibo drop this week, releasing the figures for Banjo-Kazooie, Terry, and Byleth. So meet Jiggy, Good Boy, and Mad Lad. Amiibo are Nintendo's toys to life, and in Smash you name them, can customize them with special abilities, and can train them up to level 50. You can see the beginning of this training here. Not very impressive yet, but they did get trickier as they leveled up. They learn from you and get smarter, and their stats also increase naturally, so they get even stronger than anyone playing the characters normally. The end result is a level 9 computer player on performance enhancers. Also a Byleth that would occasionally teabag, which he sure didn't learn from me. Maybe he has an advantage state when crouching and he just couldn't make up his mind on when to use it. Anyway, while they did kill me several times near the end, I'm proud to say that none of them ever took a match from me. I trained them cycling through Mega Man, Min Min, and Inkling. It took 20 matches to get them to level 50, though Mad Lad did finish up around early. The Animal Crossing Hello Kitty crossover cards also came out this week. It was a Target exclusive, and I hear that getting them online or for store pickup was a mess. I went in after 6 on Friday, just in case, and surprisingly, they still had some behind the counter, so I grabbed one for me, because I like Animal Crossing and Amiibo, and one for my sister, because she likes Animal Crossing and Hello Kitty. No more than that, because we do not do the scalper thing here. Never. I was glad to get them because my OCD wanted them, though my mother, who tried to get them for us on the app, was annoyed by the whole process. She was happy I found them, of course, she just didn't much like the way things were set up. So here they are. The last Amiibo for Smash Fighter Pass 1, which they look great, they're good quality like they normally are, and yeah, I'm happy to have them as part of my collection. Taxes are done for the year. I finished them last week, but I think I forgot to mention that, but it's a big deal to me, okay? They're a pain in the ass. And I am also continuing to read the worst book I've ever experienced. It's over 1,000 pages long, and I have about 400 pages left. Kill me. And that's not the only thing I got up to this week. I also scripted 2 videos, non-backlog related. Both are about Smash. The first is about who I want to see in Smash, and the second is about who people wish they didn't see in Smash, so look forward to those. Hopefully I'll get the first of them out this week, but this will be a little more editing intensive, so no promises. Well, that's another game down, and also several Amiibos obtained, further fueling my OCD with collecting things. Don't worry, it is only good and healthy and does not cause a fair bit of stress at all. Regardless, thanks for watching. I'll be back next week with another episode, so if this is the sort of thing that interests you, maybe consider subscribing. Later.